Hi again, Bodhipaksha here. More stuff about my book, A Buddhist View on Vegetarianism. Actually, it's Vegetarianism, A Buddhist View. I wanted to bring up the question of whether the Buddha was a vegetarian or not, because when I first started exploring Buddhism and vegetarianism and the relation between them, I was mostly going on a book by Roshi Philip Kapleau called To Cherish All Life. And in that book he argued that the Buddha was a vegetarian. There are some passages that suggest that the Buddha did eat meat. For example, in the Buddha's last meal is said to have been pork, which was tainted and caused him to die. In itself, I suppose that's not a good recommendation for meat eating. But Kapleau argued that that was a misinterpretation, and that a famous rule in the Buddhist monastic guide to conduct was possibly a later interpolation into the scriptures. And this rule is in a sutta called the Jivaka Sutta, and the Buddha says to his monks, "I say that in 3 situations flesh can be partaken of: when it is not seen, heard, or suspected that an animal has been killed for a monk." Now, I did a lot of digging around in the Pali scriptures, and there are lots of references to monks eating meat, and even to monks or nuns offering meat to the Buddha. And I came to the conclusion Philip Kapleau was simply wrong. Actually, the Buddha did eat meat. So where does that leave us? I'm a Buddhist vegetarian. I argue that Buddhist ethics suggest that we should, wherever possible, be vegetarian. But the Buddha himself wasn't a vegetarian. And he even gave this teaching, apparently, in the Jivaka Sutta about when it was acceptable for monks to accept meat or not to accept meat. Now, you have to put things in their historical context and look at how the Buddha actually lived. The monks and nuns in the Buddha's day didn't work. It was very important that they didn't work. They didn't work for a number of reasons. One was that if they worked, then that didn't allow them time for practice. They became essentially householders. Another important reason that they didn't work was that in order to do work, they would generally end up doing things that caused harm to other beings. Monks and nuns weren't allowed, for example, to make bricks out of mud, because there are creatures living in mud, and they would be harmed. Monks and nuns aren't allowed to dig the ground, because, again, that would disturb worms, etc. So on the one hand, you've got this quite strong emphasis on compassion and on not causing harm, but on the other hand, you've got the Buddha saying that monks and nuns can eat meat. So it all seems rather contradictory. But it all actually ties together, because in the absence of livelihood, that is conventional livelihood, the way that monks and nuns got their food traditionally was by going from door to door and receiving scraps put in their bowls. Now, we think of India as being a largely vegetarian country, and so it would therefore be quite easy for the Buddha and the monks and the nuns to go from door to door and accept lots of vegetarian food and be vegetarian. But it's quite obvious, again, from looking at the early Buddhist scriptures, that India was not a vegetarian country at all in those days. We think of Hindus, for example, as reverencing the cow, but in those days there were lots of references to cows being slaughtered and butchered by the roadside. There are references to the priests, the Brahmin priests, killing cattle as part of sacrifices to the gods. So things were very different then. We didn't have a vegetarian India. We had an India where meat eating was very common. So if you lived by going from door to door begging, you were going to get meat put in your bowl. It was going to be pretty difficult to be vegetarian. You'd have to find out, first of all, which households were vegetarian, and they might be few and far between, and only beg at those households. And if it's anything like today, that would mean that probably 19 out of 20 or more households you'd have to bypass in order to get a decent meal.